One time.
All right, we will start our financial affairs meeting, starting with a roll call. Ms. Blitzstein.
Mia Blitzstein here.
Zachary Epps. Daniel Schultz, present.
Leah Mulhern present.
Charles Riddell Williams, present. Ross Whiting, present.
Jenny Lohman present. Robin Murphy present.
And Pamela Henry present. Can I have a motion to approve the last minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
There's no opposed. All right, so those minutes have been approved. And I will turn over the financial affairs meeting to Mr. Swigart.
Thank you very much, Ms. Henry. So as you recall, we started the process for the feasibility study sometime last spring. And now, not quite a year later, we're reaching the culmination of the first presentation of that facilities feasibility study to the public. So we have a couple of honored guests here tonight, KCBA, to review some of the results of some of the things we've been looking at and discussing over this past year and some of the information we've gathered. And no further ado, I'll turn it over to Mike Kelly from KCBA.
Thank you. Thank you for having us again tonight. As Josh said, my name is Mike Kelly. That's Jim Kiefer and Drake Hummel. We're architects with KCBA Architects. We've been working with the district for a little over a year now with a study with a lot of different options. Many of you have seen parts of this over the last 6 months or so. So I'm going to try to go as fast as possible tonight to try to show a little bit of background, but feel free to stop anytime if there's some pieces that you were not familiar with. But we really want to try to get to some conclusions and look, this is February of 2024 already. What should be the direction and some planning? What's next steps that you need from us in order to help build a bit of a master plan?
At the queue.
Oh, is it? Do you want me to, right? Thanks. I'll go back to really quick, but design team was many people from our office as well as an engineering firm looking at mechanical, electrical, plumbing issues. And then as Tim had said, there's Revision, which is a sustainability consultant. So again, it's much more than just 1 or 3 people. There was a much larger team involved. When we're looking at these things, we're looking at your buildings, both operational needs and educational needs. Architecture, looking at roofs and windows and things like that. But our specialty is on schools and education, and the buildings have to thrive as institutes for education. And that's part of the analysis that we're looking at. You've got some tremendous buildings and have done a lot of work in recent years. 3 new elementary schools, the reconstruction of Cedarbrook, and a lot of work that's been done in Myers. Tim actually obviously showed a lot more tonight. So you're starting with a lot of very good examples, but there's a few buildings that aren't on this list. And that's part of what we wanted to look at as far as a district roadmap. So we're going to cover 4 things tonight. Highlights of the study and some issues with Elkins Park. High school infrastructure upgrades, talking a little bit about the district office, and a quick update on the high school athletic complex. So the study was a very collaborative process between ourselves, administrators, and principals from all of the buildings. We walked through all the buildings. We spoke with Tim and his staff at every building. So really had a lot of input from your staff and from your teachers. And what we've learned was the existing Elkins Park building should be replaced. That building as it currently stands is in poor condition. It needs everything. If you make a laundry list of everything that building needs, it's 90% of what a new building would be. So there is a lot of needs in that building. When we start to look at options, the current occupancy of that building is all of your 5th and 6th graders. If we said, hey, let's just move them back to the elementary schools, there's not enough capacity in the elementary schools. If we said, hey, let's move them to the middle schools, well, there's not enough capacity in the middle school. So we're going to show a bit of a hybrid example over time. Montgomery County projects that over the next 10 years, district-wide, you're pretty steady on enrollment. And if anything, in the K-5 primary education area, you're actually going to see a bit of an increase. So we could look at an expansion at Cedarbrook to accommodate 6th grade. We could look at expansions at Glenside to accommodate 5th grade. And we're going to show those options in a second. Other elementary schools are a little bit more challenging to expand. They're pretty small sites, so trying to expand them any further would be a challenge. And certainly if there's a desire for an early learning center, an area to bring all of district kindergarten or pre-K or 1st grade and things like that together, there's a lot of examples and a lot of options to what the Elkins Park property could be in the future. So that's kind of what we learned, and we said, all right, let's look at a couple of pathways to consider. Do we maintain Elkins Park as a 5-6 center, either renovate that building or build new? Do we close Elkins Park and expand Cedarbrook and to accommodate 6th grade, move 5th grade back in the elementary schools, or do we close Elkins Park, expand Cedarbrook again for 6th and 8th, and then look at possibly building a new building, whether that's another elementary school, a replacement elementary school, or an early learning center for some of your youngest students. So let's explore kind of those 3 options. As I said, Elkins Park, a big building, and pretty much in several states of disrepair, from the electrical service to the exterior veneer and facade, the casework and things like that inside the building are just in poor condition. There's areas of piping that's rotted out. It's a very old building. And again, it was not on the list of new or recently renovated. So there's a lot of challenges there. As an elementary school, it has an extremely large gym and an extremely large auditorium, because as most schools in Pennsylvania, it started as one thing and then became something else and changed again. So the space, the overall size of the building is actually too big anyway for the amount of students that are in there. If you look at Elkins Park and we're talking about renovating it or just maintaining it, you're going to continue to have maintenance issues, high costs due to all of those maintenance issues. The risk of exposure when we talk about unhealthy air quality, there are no air exchanges in that building. You're basically heating from baseboards and then opening windows or window air conditioners when needed. So there's no real indoor air quality monitoring as we would see in more modern buildings, and certainly to keep up with modern building codes. The classrooms themselves, one of the tough parts there is while we have giant gyms and giant auditoriums, we have very small classrooms. So especially for 5th and 6th graders, those gals are starting to get a little bit bigger. That's not a lot of space. Those actually are designed at the state minimum requirement for classroom spaces, which is about 660 square feet. Those are as small as we can make them, and Pennsylvania would still consider them a classroom. So that's, again, pretty undersized, and those are the things that are very difficult to try to renovate. If we look at renovating versus reconstruct, as I said, 90% of that grocery list is about what you would get for a new building anyway. And renovating buildings with students in them can be extremely disruptive. So if there was a new building built behind, or if students were in the modular trailers, or if the students were someplace else, maybe that would be a different story. But as it sits, it would be a challenge. And certainly the cost is almost as much as building new at that sense. As I mentioned, there was a study involved as well from Montgomery County. The highlights of that is basically saying, over the next 10 years, you're going to gain a whopping 6 students. Where they come from, no one knows. But that's the big prediction, is 6. Now, the way it's a little slanted is that there's a much larger increase in primary students, K to 8, essentially, than high school students. Now, that can have a variety of reasons. Oftentimes, as well, as you're improving your high schools and improving your secondary schools, any type of perceived drop-off when it goes to high school can start to come back. But we're basically looking at a district that is maintaining its enrollment across all boards, which is good to know. You're not shrinking, you're not growing, but any challenge that you have now is a challenge you're going to have in the future. So we take all of your buildings and we look at enrollment. Now, these are numbers from last year, but they're fairly close to what you have this year. The capacity, how many students we feel we can fit in those buildings. And you look at about how full that is. And you target around 85%. You're looking for a solid B. That allows you to gain a few without going to 30 kids in a class, and pretty much balances out a classroom size anywhere between 22 and say 25 kids in a class. So that's around the target that you have. And what you have right now is fine. K-4 in the 4 elementaries, again, 5, 6 in Elkins Park. So what happens if we take 670 kids out of Elkins Park, we throw them back in the elementaries? Well, now you spilled over the cart. And we kind of knew that. So we said, all right, that's over 100% full. We're certainly way over 85%. That's a bit too much. So what if we split the difference? And 335 head to the elementary schools, spread out over 4 schools. Essentially, you would stay in your home school. It fits-ish. Principals, there may be 1 or 2 classrooms in schools that are available. You would need 2 or 3. There's ways to do it. I'm sure your principals would be saying, well, we can't put all this. It would be very tight, but could happen in a short-term solution. Moving 335 kids into Cedarbrook would not occur except if there was an addition, and we could show that there. If we step back to, Cedarbrook, it's only at about 69%. So there's some room, not for all of the kids, but let's say half. So the expansion would really just need to include about half the kids. We're not talking about a huge addition onto the middle school, but we're also looking forward 10 years. So with that additional amount of students coming in by 2032, if we keep this same K5, 6, 8 scenario with an expanded Cedarbrook, and Cedarbrook and the high school are okay, but now the elementary schools are starting to pop. So it kind of showed us short term, it could work, but be tight, but we should be planning sooner than later for something to achieve those. So let's look at Cedarbrook. Was rebuilt. We were looking at the possibility of building a bit of an addition here on would be the east side, basically facing 309. That's 309 in the upper right corner. An academic addition built on that side. That would kind of straighten out that road a little bit. By straightening out that road, you can see on the Google map below, we're getting pretty close to that, that athletic field that's there. We're certainly going to need to add parking. While 6th graders don't drive, their teachers do. So we're going to need added parking. So we essentially lose a field, but you still have a large open space that's there. The baseball field stays, the track stays. So all of that addition would happen on that one side to try to minimize the amount of site work that we'd be doing, but maximizing the amount of space that we may have. And then maybe there's a small addition onto the cafeteria. So if we kind of blow that up a little bit, it's kind of a single loaded corridor on 2 floors. So that would be a 2-story space. Classrooms, labs, we always kind of say, let's build what you don't have. Doesn't have to be 6th grade English classrooms. This could be a science lab for 8th grade, and some other room gets converted to that. But we think about 10 to 12 classrooms would be required all on that side. Being 2 stories, we could make a little face on 309 as well to kind of give ourselves a little bit of a facade to look at from 309. Maybe that lab in the corner is a little bit taller on the 2nd floor. So we think that's something that fits, adding a little bit more space in the cafeteria to try to accommodate some of the common spaces, but all the other parts of that building, the gym, the auditorium, a lot of that core pieces within the building are in good shape, as they should be. That building's reconstructed in fairly good shape. So we thought this was one option to build an extension onto this that covers 6th grade. So what do you do with it? Well, again, a couple of different options. Glenside, again, a fairly new building, is in good shape. There's a kind of a left and right 1-story corner when looking at the front of that building. So one idea was to build a 2-story extension, essentially extend that 2nd floor. We would be building 8 classrooms. Then we had to eliminate 2 to get to 8, so you're gaining 6. 6 classrooms, that would level out that number that we saw with Glenside right away, and provide that space with a little bit of breathing room. We could enlarge that and build a larger addition there. This would then start to yield you saying, all right, well, now we've got one building has a lot of extra space. Now you might consider shifting and redistricting a little bit, but this may be one way to do this at one school and kind of buy you even more time as some of that increase continues. Glenside, really, in our opinion, was the easiest building of the 4 to try to expand. And certainly, if you're trying to expand, let's build something a little bit bigger than just 1 or 2 classrooms at a time. So that's how that would expand. Looking at Elkins Park, we talked about a renovation option, renovate and expand it, replacing in kind or replace smaller. And there's all costs associated to that. Just renovating is about $45 million. Again, it's almost what all of the things that you would need in a new building. There's an idea that we might renovate and expand. We'll show that as an option in a second. If you're replacing in kind, if nothing was there and you were starting over to build a 120,000 square foot building, that would be about $80 million. So if we were looking at just building a new 5-6 center in its place, knocking down this existing building, that's a pretty big expense. Replacing smaller, the idea there is if it's not a 5-6 center, if we're not building it for 700, 750 kids, we could build a smaller building like an early learning center. If we're talking about kindergarten and pre-K, kindergarten and first grade, something that isn't the size of a full-size elementary school, but something a little smaller, that might be an option as well. If we take a look at the option about renovating the existing building into an early learning center, again, you're spending almost, well, you're starting to get to where a new building would be. But the interesting option here is that the district offices, this building here, this building was closed, could move into what is essentially the newer part, this addition that was here, newer being still 25 years, but newer certainly than the existing building with the auditorium. If we segregated that part of the building into district offices and then just utilize the other essentially 2/3 of that building as an early learning center, while we're doing that, maybe we create a little addition out in the front that's a new front door. Let's make it look a little cheery. And then we have a little bit of space in the back for maybe an academic space, a library perhaps, or something in the back. So kind of a minimal addition, but something like an order of magnitude like this is what we were talking about as far as the renovation and addition option. There's not a big cost difference between the two, but at least it would give this building the look of something new. Going back again, if we're comparing that to, 49 million to 53 for building everything brand new, those numbers are kind of close. Now the difference is in the renovate and expand, we're moving the district office into Elkins Park versus just building a smaller school on its own. So there's, again, advantages and disadvantages. We were joking earlier, our job is to show you options. You have the hard job of picking the option that you want to move forward with. But we thought this was an interesting option if we were looking at gutting the existing building, essentially keeping the frame, almost what you kind of did at Cedarbrook, with a little bit of an aesthetic addition on the front and an academic addition on the back, could breathe some new life there. We could also look at some additions here with drop off as well, putting a new road and some parking where the modular trailers are, but you could increase the site safety a little bit. There's just a little bit of parking in the front, but if we provide parents a way to drop off in the back and come back out, we still have district office parking, we still have school visitor parking, and that would be very important to be distinguish between which is the office and which is the new school. So here, we've got the little camera guy, but here's where that kind of broke down. Again, the concerns here is that it's a high cost to renovate, but if it's also the solution for the district office, one of two that we're going to show, something to consider. The idea of an early learning center. So this is, I cheated, and this is a picture of a school we did in Haverford. But let's just pretend we're building it brand new. Again, that's around 53 million. When I talk about the concerns for Act 34, this is where state laws become fun. Act 34 was set to limit how much you spend on schools. The result is schools have to be built bigger because you only are allowed to build for the amount of students that are in that building. Construction costs have gone up a lot, and kids are only still kids. So that it is a much harder challenge now to build a school for anyone under, say, 700, 750. So a small early learning center building on its own could be a big challenge to build with Act 34 limits. We're doing a new elementary school, I won't say where, and it kept getting bigger. We had to build it bigger than they wanted because it was the only way to get the Act 34 numbers to work, because you just need more classrooms. So there may be a little bit of concerns and challenges there to build a standalone building that would be small. The result may be classrooms. Maybe this building doesn't have a gym. Early learning center doesn't necessarily need a gym. Does it need a big cafeteria? Does it need a big kitchen? Does it need spaces like that that don't count for Act 34 credits? That may be a little bit of a trade-off, but it's just something to.
So like this Act 34 that you're alluding to, that is if we were looking at building new,
Yeah.
correct?
Right.
If
So
we were looking at the renovation option.
that wouldn't apply. So Act 34 only applies to a new building or an expansion larger than 20%. So at the middle school, we'd be okay because that's not a 20% addition.
Right.
The two little yellow boxes, that's not 20%. So only if you were expanding to a larger degree. So that's a good question, a good distinction. So moving on to the high school, and I'll speed up a little bit. Again, we kind of know the existing conditions of that building. There are parts that are in good condition. There's parts that are a little bit less. Some site concerns, roofing concerns, just some areas around the building that just need additional repair. Like we could update our pool slide there. I think Tim did a nice job there. So there's areas of the building that are air conditioned and areas of the building that aren't. And that's really one of the larger concerns there of the building. So we kind of gave an area of 315,000 square feet. You're only air conditioning about 68,000. So there's limited areas in the building that are being air conditioned. Air conditioning and electrical costs have doubled since COVID, and they continue to go up. So air conditioning projects are the most expensive that we've ever seen them. So we kind of looked at a cost of the bare minimum, which is just a new HVAC system, not really repairing anything else. If we were going to add sprinklers into that building or change out the lighting, just kind of the next step up, you're still looking at a construction cost of around 32 million, which really kind of leads more to a total project cost in our estimate closer to 50. Because of course, when you're in the ceiling and you're putting in air conditioning, we go, well, what about that chalkboard and the floor and the wall, and should we replace the door? So that starts to become a much larger project. It's kind of, putting that clean spot on your car. It's like, oh, well, now I got to wash the whole thing. So those are the challenges of a renovation of something that large. But easily you could be looking at an infrastructure upgrade project of upwards of $50 million just for basic stuff. You're not moving walls around. You're cleaning up everything. And obviously air conditioning is a big plus, but that's a big cost. And something like that would be done over a period of time. So a summer is when a lot of that heavy work would be done. And then there's a lot of work that's done during the school year where there may be areas of the building that can't be occupied by students. So we may have to shuffle some people around and things like that. So it takes some time to document, procure all those things, especially a lot of things with lead time now. But we're doing a couple of these projects right now in William Penn and Upper Darby. You do a lot in the summer, you kind of minimize what you do in the school year, and then you do a lot the following summer. The district office building, again, we're sitting in here right now. Again, we kind of know some of the conditions here. It's just an older building, not air conditioned, and it's a lot larger than it needs to be. When we did a program analysis of this building, if you take the idea of not having a boardroom in it, this existing building is about 38,000 square feet. And if you were going to build new, or in the case of renting someplace, you could get away with a little over 13,000 square feet. So you're almost 2/3 bigger than you need to be with a couple of things taken away. Again, this building was built as a school, so there's some nice size offices here just because it used to be a classroom. Now they did a nice job chopping it in half, and in some cases chopping that half in half. But it's an older building, and again, renovating this would be a pretty expensive task. So renovating this building on its own, kind of looking at that same target like we were doing at the high school, just HVAC, close to $12 million. Another option is renting space, and we did look at a few spots with the district, nothing that really looked achievable. If you were going to renovate as a portion of an existing school project, saying we're going to renovate a building somewhere, I'm going to hint and tell you we're going to show an option there at the high school in a second. To renovate that into a space is about $3 million. So that's a heck of a lot less than renovating a 40,000 square foot building completely. If you were going to build that as part of a new building, just adding that on to all the other costs of a new building is about twice that much. And again, you walk into Act 34 issues. So just looking at that kind of cost to renovate this building would be twice what it would be to replace brand new, and a quarter of what it would be to maybe renovate in another space. It's a long way of saying this building may not be one you want to put a lot of money into. So looking at the high school, we looked at an area right along the walk, essentially, that's going up to the stadium. Those are a lot of your tech spaces right now, wood shops and things like that, which are great programs. The spaces could be bigger. And that's a spot that's isolated enough away from the front door of the building. It's right by the parking lot. It is on that walk up to the stadium. That could be a spot that's isolated that we could put a sign that says Cheltenham district offices, and have its own spot, its own space in there for the district offices. That's about 15,000 square feet. So we have a little bit of space there. We could build a little bit of a screen there because there's a maintenance area and stuff like that in the back. But now you kind of have this new facade from the parking lot side where everybody's coming to park to go to a football game. They're parking there, kind of clean up that facade, add a screen, refresh the entry a little bit. Now you've got something new that says district on it as you're walking up, separate from the main door of the school. Now replacing those spaces could be in a number of places. It could be here, it could be an addition out on the other side of this, but we are looking at about a 13,000 square foot addition for those spaces. Wood shop again, but maybe something that's dealing a little bit more with robotics or computers. So we always kind of say, let's build for the kids, let's renovate for the adults. No offense, because you need a nice office, but we could renovate those spaces and do a nice job in there, and then bring STEM more to the core of the school. So right now you have this kind of racetrack all the way around. Well, we could throw a corridor right through the middle of the space, and now you've got 2 courtyards that you could utilize maybe a little bit better, and bring STEM right to the middle of the school. So this was an idea of integrating the district office into the high school and maybe looking at some options there. So there are a lot of options. Our recommendations kind of in short term and long. Go ahead.
Like, were there costs associated with those recommendations?
So looking at the addition, the work that would need to be done here, we're at about 15 million. Now that would include, that's not air conditioning throughout the rest of the building. And if that was included in that, there's some economy of scale of, hey, we're going to do this and in addition, and do some other things in the building. But if this is, say 15 or I think that could probably come down a little bit to renovate this and build that as an addition. That would, again, eliminate the need for this building, provide some upgraded STEM spaces at the high school, maybe start a larger renovation in the high school as well. You would need to replace these rooms. These are active rooms that are being utilized. Like I said, there's any one of these tech spaces, when you go in, they always need more room. They always need more storage. So all of those spaces want a little bit more space. So that could be provided as an addition in the courtyard, or like I said, it could be a larger addition out in that kind of parking area.
Thank you.
Sure. So the recommendations that we had of all the things that we've seen, short term, The sixth grade move to the high school or middle school makes a lot of sense. It's kind of a nice little spot. It's actually kind of a little nook in the back. It fits well. Having sixth grade integrated with middle school academically seems to make some sense as well. The fifth grade move then is where you have a lot of different options. We could expand Glenside a little bit to get that started, but know that there's another step, probably 7 or 8 years down the line, or the larger Glenside addition. Then Elkins Park as a site is empty. That building is empty. That could be renovated. That could be taken down and just brought back as a park. We're doing that at Methacton School District right now. They removed a school that they don't need. They're taking it down. They're making a little meadow park out of it. It's kind of nice. There's a big park behind it. Now they have future plans for that site, but in the short term, it's a big open field. It's still a community asset. Still has the track. Still has some of the fields and things there. And then look at long-term about moving the district office into the high school. To us, that made a little bit more sense than, again, the other option, doing that in Elkins Park. But doing that there, you're essentially renovating that entire building. Now you're into the 40, 45, 49 million, I think that option. So staying here maybe as long as you can, hold out as long as you can. But then moving into the high school seemed to make the most sense of that. So out of all of those opportunities, those were the recommendations that we felt.
What was the cost for a renovation at EP just with our early learning center in mind? Not adding admin, but just renovating for,
So we showed 46, I think, let me go back, to renovate the building. So the challenge there, even if you didn't move the district office over, you still have the auditorium and all that space in blue there on the left. So if you're renovating at 44.6, that's the building. Could we isolate and not renovate the auditorium? Sure, but then what is that? You'd still need to heat it because you don't want it to freeze or anything. So you're kind of 2/3 of the way there of moving the district office in there as it is. Now, those are classrooms, so the district office and here we might take some walls down and things like that, and do a little bit more moving of walls and on these 2 floors than you would do in here. These are classrooms. They're small, but if you're bringing in early learning, those kids are a little smaller than 5th and 6th grade. So while there may be a few walls or things to kind of look at here, this could kind of be cleaned up and moved in. So I don't know that there's really a big discount in a way of saying, well, let's move early learning there, but not do the district office, because you would still want to do something with the remaining end of the building.
I'm thinking there could be an option where we look at operations side of central office with facilities at EP, but then you look at the Office of Education going to the high school. So I'm just trying to think of the different potential variables because it is important. One thing I've asked Mrs. Swiger to do is, and we may need to reach out, is really to do a cost analysis of what are we losing from an efficiency standpoint of keeping this building running. I mean, we got to keep the heat on in the winter, but in some of the office, regulating is very difficult. So you have windows off, windows open, air going, plus heat on, I mean, so just really want to do kind of a cost analysis to see what shutting this down would yield us. This is not a site that I would be interested in keeping. EP is a site definitely that we have to keep. It's just the land itself, but I'm not hard pressed to keep this on one voice, and I recognize that. But what is this a little over? I'm just we on 7 acres here. 4.9 acres. This is 4.9. I mean, so I don't really see what the value added would be. But there's a lot, let me ask you this, have you guys, as architects, just structurally, and Mr. Holman, this is something that we may need to look at also as we go deeper once we kind of know a direction. I'm just trying to figure out what we're going to do with the modulars in terms of short term. How could they be a benefit? I know long term we got to get rid of them, right? But short term, how could they benefit with any type of moves potentially that we would need to do? So I know, and I really appreciate Mike and his team and really their patience and flexibility. They've been awesome. But you guys have some decisions to make. So are we okay to open it up
Yeah, absolutely.
for questions?
The last part we had was a little bit about the.
Oh, go ahead, hit that part.
But I think to your point about those recommendations in the smaller pieces, the moving the sixth grade, that little piece makes some sense. A little expansion at Glenside makes some sense. Even if you move this into the high school with a small addition, those are all smaller things that allows you to get rid of this building and the Elkins Park building without any major stuff. So you kind of dealt with the issue.
I gotta be transparent.
Now you can start moving forward.
The Glenside piece makes me nervous because I heard the word redistricting.
If you're building a larger addition to. The challenge there, so Glenside of all of them would want a little bit of an addition just to keep what it has and have fifth grade move into.
I'm
The
willing to
larger
entertain,
addition.
I'm just putting it out.
Right.
So I want to open it to you guys. I'm clear in my mind with conceptually where things are. What questions do you guys have?
Questions from the board? Ms. Mulhern?
I guess what we just talked about was my question anyway, to clarify. So number 2, all right, I get sixth grade addition at Cedarbrook, and then we push K5 back into the K-4 buildings. And there's room now, there won't be room eventually. But I guess I'm confused. The small addition needs to happen at Glenside, which is a 2, how many classrooms is the small addition?
Gain 6.
Gain 6, lose 2, add 8,
Right.
gain 6. And that needs to happen regardless? Or that's in, we don't need it now, but we need it in 10 years. I guess that's.
Of the 4 elementary schools, moving fifth grade back, Glenside would struggle the most. So Glenside could use that addition in the immediate term, and I'm sure they would use it.
Yeah,
Even if the kindergarten center occurred and kindergarten moved back out, there's still rooms, there's district ed support and things like that could shift in.
So Glenside, that's for them just bringing back
Fifth grade.
They're
years
fifth
on
graders.
graders.
So I guess
The second option we show there, the larger addition, is if you want to have Glenside be bigger, with the idea that then now you could start shifting some students.
No, that's good clarifying question.
that, and then I guess my other question, this is not something that you can necessarily answer, but more just curiosity. Would redoing the catchments, the redistricting, doing that before you push fifth grade back in, would that align things so you didn't need an addition at Glenside at all? I guess I'm not asking for an answer. That was more just
I don't
wondering.
think so, because if you look at, we're gonna have to go way back.
Sorry.
Those numbers were all like full, and then Glenside was a little over full. So it's not.
So it would just
so
move the
this-
problem somewhere else
Or everywhere.
or everywhere.
Yeah.
But that's fine. That's what I
this
wanted to
one. So
understand.
86, 82, 83, so that's not 100, but that's
getting
23,
capacity.
24 kids in the class. That's
You're losing a lot of flexibility in the
full-ish, right.
building.
so, if you took 9 kids out of Glenside and moved to the Meyer, that's not really gonna do anything. So the small addition, the idea that was not a redistricting option.
Mhm.
The larger addition, there was an idea that you could, if you wanted to, make Glenside an 800 kid school. And now you have a big and you have 3 mediums, and that's okay, but that would be a way to start shifting. Or you build that addition,
The smaller.
everything's
addition.
set, you're good for 5 years, but that's when you would start thinking, okay, do we want to do the early learning center?
Or a bigger addition. Is that?
Right, or do we build a bigger addition, or is it another elementary? What do we want to do with Elkins Park? as a site long-term, because in 2032, then we're gonna be really full.
I think the one thing you guys need to think about as a board is, you guys all have a lot of history within the district. I'm learning it over the years. The question really becomes, one, when you look at the numbers in terms of enrollment and 10 years out, we're not growing. We're not losing, but we're not growing. To build a new middle or 5-6, I don't think is feasible. And I don't think that the model is in our best interest. It's been proven that that model is not working for us as a district. So I think that this is something that needs to be taken into consideration as you guys are asking questions and really unpacking this. And Mike, I think where we're going to kind of need help, this gives us a good baseline, but I think where we would need help and have to unpack this even a little more is visually being able to see what that phase process would look like based on what we feel the priorities would be in terms of what would need to happen first as we unpack this and what the financial implications would be. So I'm only trying to be value added with my comments right now, but please, you guys, feel free. Josh, go ahead.
I'd say there's some other considerations with a little guidance. Programmatically, we do have some classrooms that do not, like we have 2 pre-K programs that could really exist in any building at Winco. We have special ed classrooms that could be shifted to others. So programmatically with guidance, those situations could be examined to determine what makes the most sense to limit any potential redistricting as much as possible. There are also certain staffing and programmatic considerations regarding the number of support staff, custodians, maintenance staff, teachers, administrative staff based on how many buildings you have. And there are also transportation considerations, physically getting kids to school and what a bus schedule would look like for the various building structures, which we're happy to take a deeper dive in with some scenarios.
Mr. Epps, and
Yeah, continuing along the same lines, this is related to the early learning center. If, is that a requirement based upon capacity or is that an option?
It's an option.
It's an option.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, it's a great option. It's a way to pull kids from every building. So at Glenside, we're adding an addition. That helps Glenside. If we add a big addition, then now we got to redistrict. Or if you had a district-wide something, a 5-6 center or a K1 center, now I'm pulling from everywhere. And so every school benefits from that. Every child goes through that. So that's an option of a few options.
I asked because, appreciate that. And I appreciate that you all are like deep in Cheltenham right now. So you can look at a holistic perspective. It only helps our options as well. So thanks. So I was asking that because earlier on, I know, and I'm only one person saying this, but earlier on, there was an idea around using that space as some sort of sports complex, which could be a community asset and also thinking about there's not a lot of developmental space in Cheltenham. So I'm wondering, was that deemed as like a non-viable option or is that still somewhere in the back of the books? At that space, yes, at that space.
You can do anything you'd like there with that building. There's a cost associated to anything you want to do.
Yeah, so that's my point. So has that been explored to the point where it's like, no, the cost, we don't want to look at that, or is that something
It
that
just
could
depends on
still
what
be
you want to do.
explored?
If you kept
There's
the gym,
appetite.
and knocked everything else down, there's still a lot of money to repair the gym. You've got 2 walls you'd be missing and have to put back. There could be fields there. So we could look at any of those things. All of those things would be kind of added things on top of, they're all options. Again, like Dr. Scriven said, if this, no offense to this building, but if this building and maybe even the site went away, okay. Elkins Park's a great spot, a huge site. So there's a lot of future possibilities there for an athletic complex or another school or many things. This was a way of saying by adding an addition here and here, you don't need that building anymore. Now you have all the options are on the table. So anything it's associated with the cost would just be a want at that point and say, all right, if we want to do this, if you took that down and found a community partner to build a community center, great, that could easily.
So Mike, in terms of like us being fiscally responsible, which is the biggest concern, dismantling the 5-6 model without having to redistrict. What would be the timeline before we would have to do something different? You don't have to answer that now, but just as we're looking at enrollment and other implications, that's what we need to unpack, where visually we can kind of see incrementally what would our immediate next steps need to be, and what would it look like. I know that we have to grapple with this as a board, but then we also are going to need community stakeholder input as well, with whatever recommendations we put out there. Which I'll be honest, if we could ideally come up with 2 options, 2 recommendations, I don't know if we need to put 3 out there. I think that if we could come up with 2 solid recommendations with timelines and financial implications phased in over time, that it's easier to quantify and get feedback on option A or option B. Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Ms. Listing?
Just one quick thought. I know we don't have an answer to this question right now, but thinking about transportation costs for a potential new early learning center, in addition to like the scheduling issue, if we weren't paying for the cost associated with this building because the district office was absorbed either at this new early learning center or at the high school, is that like an even match transportation costs versus like building operation potentially, that might not be something we feel so much if we're not paying to run a building that's like 3 times the size that we need?
Transportation, well, that's 2 separate things a little bit.
Okay.
Transportation wise, not having that 4th step or 5-6 center, there's some savings there because they're doing the kindergarten or they're doing the elementary school run anyway, and then just throw 5th grade on. They're doing the middle school run anyway, throw 6th grade on. So that's 1 less stop.
If we didn't do the early
If you didn't
learning
have a
center.
5-6 center, or just if you had elementary, middle, and high school, it's 3 steps. So if you had an early learning center as part of that, it's basically a wash from what you have now, because you're doing that already. So there's the elementary school run, there's a group that's taking everybody from one group and bringing them there, and whether it's 5th and 6th or kindergarten and first, it's kind of the same thing. So transportation is a wash if you have the early learning center. There's a little bit of savings there.
We don't. We just do
And that pause in between. Certainly, and to Josh's point, if you don't have a building, that's a lot less cost. The maintenance costs, the heating costs, the cooling costs, especially with a building of this vintage, the insulation, those aren't operable windows. And as you mentioned, there's been times that we're here, the air conditioning's on, the heater's running, and the windows open. It's like, okay. So there's a huge operational savings not having this building and then Elkins Park as well. I mean, that's a big building to heat and cool. So if that came down and was Meadow and this was no longer the district's property anymore, that's 160,000 square feet of space you're not in charge of anymore and paying for and cleaning and heating. So there's certain.
I'll add to that. On top of that, the 2 buildings we're talking about up in Spark and this building are the most inefficient on heating, cooling wise. So it's not just that you're spending money to heat and cool these buildings. there's no insulation, like it's just going in, that's the, like, if you move to other buildings, you're getting an efficiency factor along with that. You know, ideally, you want to be moving towards a more efficient envelope in your buildings and not trying to keep maintaining these old envelopes that are just, there's parts of this old building we can't fix. And that's certainly a challenge. So,
One of the questions that I had, and I know along the lines of what Dr. Brendan is asking, when we get sort of that phased approach in terms of the options, like when and how things are happening, was one of the questions I had. So for example, using Glenside as an example, we're talking about building the additional in there. But because we don't have the early learning center, that means that even with the additional classroom, we still have kindergarten in that building, correct? Along with the additional fifth graders.
Mhm.
So does that allow for that additional room? And then at the point where the early learning center was built, which we're talking probably a couple of years down the road after, even after that happens, what happens with those additional classrooms in the building, for example, like, like Glenside?
Yeah, again, I think they would be utilized regardless. It's not, especially if it was the smaller edition. They would use those right now, even before fifth grade moved in. There's always a need for them. There's always a need, especially as well with district special education supports and things like that. If you have two rooms, do those become, your district autistic support? Because maybe that's happening in another building that frees up a room there. So now we have 2 or 3 brand new rooms with, toilets associated to those classrooms. We say, all right, this is going to be some of our district special ed support, because that can, actually add capacity to other buildings just by moving programs. So they would certainly be utilized.
Right.
To your point about phasing, neither addition we're talking about is overly big. The middle school one is going to take a little while, and if you just kind of look at it as seasonal, you tend to break ground in the spring because that's when the thaw is. An addition like that is probably a good year, so it's done the following summer of whatever year you did, and it's ready to go. So back that up another year of design and land development. So kind of from the word go, and that word go wants to happen sort of in a springtime, or just know that you're kind of pushing that 2-year timeline as you go. If you say go in the fall, okay, well, we might be done in the fall of the following year, so then that's not really the building. So that wouldn't be a time to transition things. So you're looking at 2 years at least from the word go before you're in that building. Glenside would be done a little quicker because it's a pretty small little addition, but again, it's kind of the same thing. Even that would take a year to get through, environmental reviews and land development and all those other kind of fun things.
And real quick, another question for consideration is, in terms of building out those rooms, are we considering having a sort of project-based learning or makerspace type of environment that can grow where it's not just the traditional classrooms, but it's more creative, innovative?
It certainly could be, and that's what we're saying at the middle school. Like I wouldn't want to, we said 10 to 12 classrooms. That, no offense to English and social studies, but I wish those wouldn't be English and social studies. So if they were, they should be something different. And that's where there would be a conversation with you and your educational leaders and certainly the principal of that school. Because the 7th grade English class could even easily be 6th grade English class, but let's make that as a STEM space. Let's make this other one a science lab and things like that. So you have the opportunity there. You're building 25,000 square feet, 23,000 square feet. Let's build it with what you need there and not just, a bunch of more classrooms.
Mr. Schultz?
Sure. So thank you. This is a lot of things to think about. One thing that is helpful for me is starting to hone, as we're looking to come up with 2 options, starting to hone in on what we don't want or what we, and therefore what we do. And it sounds like the 6th grade expansion on Cedar Brook fits with a lot of other options. Like there's 5th and 6th grade. We need to find a host for 5th and 6th grade. And 6th grade on Cedar Brook. Now we just need to figure out 5th grade. So I just wanted to throw that out there as one board member. It strikes me that makes sense. I also know that in past conversations, the idea of having sixth grade in the same building as first grade or kindergarten, just from a programmatic perspective, might be very challenging and not what we want anyway as a district. So I want to throw that out. The other, regarding the short and midterm strategies for fifth grade and whether it's an early learning center, which I'm very excited by, though obviously the trade-off is the price tag. Understanding our financial capacity and getting down, I think that I'm a big believer in being efficient and effective and thoughtful with our money in order to make good long-term investments. So I think if an early education center is a good long-term investment that we can build into a X-year plan, that would be wonderful. But I want to understand if it's even feasible, financially feasible.
Got some slides here.
I figured you did, but so,
Yeah, I mean, if that was, if Josh won the lottery and had all of those things, you know, you wouldn't have to do the Glenside addition because while you're building the sixth grade addition at the middle school, the early learning center is being built either in the front or behind Elkins Park or somewhere creative where we could build that. So that's an option, but that's doing a lot of the things right away.
right, which one?
And that's where budgetary planning comes in as well. So the Glenside addition options were options, and it could be the short-term thing while you wait, or it could go, you know what, we know we want the early learning center eventually anyway. I don't want to waste not to say waste, I don't want to invest $10 million. That's the first $10 million for a new building. So let's put that there and jump in right away. But again, that has to come to fiscal planning, like you said.
Ms.
I think
Logan?
Jenny was- one sort of reflection, I don't know, this is sort of stating the obvious, Captain Obvious, but like, I look at the pictures of EP, right? Look at the pictures of EP, and I know that there, you know, some of these possible things could involve renovating EP for an early learning. As one board member, my personal opinion about EP is that that building has lived its useful life, and even with renovation, it is not worth it. Like, I just have, just with the asbestos and the mold and the lake, we could remediate and we could do all these things and we could still have problems. And I just feel like that building is, we say, thank you, EP, you know, and like move on. So, yeah, that's just a reflection on EP. The other thing is about the high school. The price tag, I know we've talked about AC at the high school off and on. The price tag is tremendous, probably only going to go up. But it is very, very, very hot. Even in cold days, it's very, like today was probably very warm in that building. And I don't want to sort of necessarily move that off. I would like to sort of see how we maybe could be creative about that in some way, shape, or form, because learning when you're sweating, you know, it's really warm in there.
Ms. Blistein?
So one thing that sort of connects to that is I'm just wondering from a sustainability perspective, have any of those costs been included in these projections? Like
Everything we're
solar
looking at
panels.
is construction costs and things like that.
Construction.
To Jim's point, you know, renovating this building is better, but not very efficient. Because again, you're gonna have better heating and air conditioning that's gonna go right through your uninsulated. So the better investment dollar, certainly, and I agree with you. And again, when we show the options, here's how that would work, but you've got a better looking 75-year-old building. So the more efficient thing to do, especially when you're debating about an older building like that vintage, is to say thanks and to build a new building. Now with that, there are a lot of sustainable attributes that you can move to. There are geothermal conditions for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, there's solar panels, there's all kinds of other things that you can do in a newer building to help that. But in any LEED project, net zero project, anything like that we've been associated with, it starts with building the most efficient building you can, wrapping that with the best envelope, as Jim had mentioned, and really starting.
So so these numbers that we're seeing are construction, like
Yes.
pure construction costs.
Right. Operating costs, you know, a new 80,000 square foot building versus a 75-year-old renovated 80,000 square foot building, the operating costs are going to be a lot more in the older building.
Thank you.
Ms. Moore?
Can I ask, trying to remember what, I think it was maybe the slide where you said what your suggestion was.
Yes.
I can't remember if it was on that one. Okay. Number 3, where you talk about or a new elementary school, and that's one that I think was in here a few times, but wasn't. I don't think we discussed it or fleshed it out anywhere unless I missed it, and I don't think I did because I'm scared.
Now, if you look at, again, 350 some fifth graders, you know, where do they go? And that number is going to rise. You're gaining about 170 kids. So total, that's 500 kids. That's about the size of an elementary school.
Correct.
When we talked about an early learning center versus a new elementary school, we said, well, what's the difference?
That's my
Okay,
question,
well, what is that? And we can discuss that and kind of go through those things. But maybe one way to make the early learning center less expensive is not having a big giant gym. Maybe there are different food options that are there that you don't need a $1 million kitchen and all the equipment that comes with it, all those things. So if we're building the academic pieces of that, that would help reduce cost in an early learning center environment. Springfield in Delaware County did one. That'd be a good one to kind of walk through. That's not to say that 20 years later, someone says, you know what, we really should have another elementary school. Well, hey, 2/3 of that's already built.
Okay.
So add the gym, add the cafeteria, and boom, now it's Main Street Elementary School.
So essentially, like, it could be, instead of an early learning
Right.
center, a K to 5. It would be more expensive because of those things you mentioned.
Yes, it would be
It's bigger,
because of
you
the
need
other
things that you wouldn't otherwise
Right.
need.
So the curriculum of that, you know, for a kindergarten classroom, we don't necessarily need to have a large art classroom. You don't necessarily need to have a large music classroom. Some of that could be done in the classrooms. We could have a multi-purpose space, and that's kind of what, if you go to the Springfield Literacy Center, you walk in, the lobby is the library. It's just books, and they wanted literacy everywhere. And then they have some multi-purpose spaces, which is where they do art and music and things like that. So we could develop that curriculum and that program so that the building doesn't have to be 100,000 square feet. It could be 60,000 square feet. And again, not to say that it couldn't get bigger over time. That property at Elkins Park is strategically, geographically perfect for your district. So that could be, again, a number of things, from an athletic center, a community center, a learning center. We did look at, you know, does that become the 5th elementary school? Does that become the 5th K-6 elementary school? Well, it's kind of the same cost as building a 5-6 center.
Okay.
So we're like, all right, well, let's not do that. But all of those options are kind of there without that existing structure there.
No, that helps. I just wanted, that was my assumption, but I hate to assume something when you're here to tell me.
No. And maybe I should have worded that a little bit better. I mean, it's essentially, it's a building to occupy X amount of kids.
Absolutely.
So that can be the little guys, the big guys, or everybody in between.
Would a K to 5 versus the early learning center avoid that Act 34 issue?
No, you're gonna
still be the
do
same.
Act 34 regardless.
Not that but you said it could be challenging with the early learning center because of the size, was my understanding.
Yes, so we would have to run those and see, and again, you would want classrooms. But we are talking about, you know, if we're moving 350 kids, it's a lot of kids.
So,
And then the preschool component of that, or any other component of that, or maybe that is where we say, hey, we're also gonna have some of our district special education happen there. So now we're building more classrooms. So the more classrooms I build, the more credit you're getting towards your Act 34 numbers.
Okay.
So that's a positive to that.
thank you.
Mr. Whiting?
Are there additional revenue streams for pre-K that we currently?
That I don't know. That's a question for you guys.
Pre-kindergarten program. So right now our pre-kindergarten program is run through the pre-K states grant operated through the IU. We currently are not the recipient of any pre-K money, and that grant won't open up for another 4 years for us to reapply.
So there would be no additional revenue if we added a bunch of pre-K.
We might be the first district in the state to add teachers in the pre-K program separately, voluntarily.
Got it. Good to know.
Mr. Burdell Williams?
Yep, I'll try to be brief, because I think my colleagues covered a lot of my questions, Ms. Mulhern specifically pointed to I'm really interested in, which is just the conversation around early learning in elementary school. So just thinking about the elementary school experience in and of itself. A school bus ride from Lava Rock to Elkins Park for a 5-year-old is a really long way. Not that I'm opposed to the model at all. I just think one of my bigger concerns about what we're doing is just infrastructure in general, right? Like right now, Elkins Park is a lot of busing from all over the district. Is geographically almost perfect for that, right? Where it is. What are the impacts for the other buildings once we start to change our model around? And thinking about that, do we have the classrooms that are we going to get the classrooms that we actually want? Like right now, if we do whether it's an early learning center or elementary school or what upgrades we have to do at the high school, if it's just air conditioning, do we still have the space that we need, right? We're talking about serving all of our students. So the points are two. The first one, just want to make sure that when we're considering all these options, we're considering the overall infrastructure impact, traffic issues, busing challenges. Of course, we'll get interest from our families about whether or not that bus ride from Lava Rock to Elkins Park is okay for their 5-year-old or not. And thinking also about the actual spaces themselves. I know we saw in the models, hey, we can give you guys options. You got the hard part of like choosing that. So I'm really interested in our educational model and what we're doing to grow curriculum, et cetera, and how that folds into all of these plans. I think it's a pretty obvious one when you say 6, 7, and 8 in one building, because I think that's an easy split that we're very familiar with. For early learning, et cetera, I'm just curious about what would happen to our model at that point. Not a question that we have to answer right now, but just something that I want to definitely consider.
We've been kicking tires of transportation, how that works. How do you, because you're now taking a kindergartner from Lava Rock all the way down to Elkins Park on a bus ride, and how does that work, and how are the pickup times the same as the elementary, and if they are, then there's a separate elementary drop off versus kindergarten drop off. Trying to figure out how that works with as minimal disruption as possible.
Yeah,
and that's challenging.
Definitely interested in that one, just in general when it comes to the decision on early learning or new elementary school. Just as one board member, right? It's just I know that there are educational models that make it work. We just talked about Springfield and Delaware County. I think you showed us another example of the early learning center. So not opposed at all. Just as we think about it, I want it to be something that works inside of our educational model and not let's necessarily do it and then make the educational model work. Like I just want to see that synergy as we develop. So that's it. Not anything more than that. No real questions. Just some information on my sake. I do agree with Mr. Schultz just around the things that we don't want. I think the simple addition, I'm calling it simple in air quotes, that we want to add or considering to add it. Cedarbrook, it's a huge amount of property there. I think we all kind of acknowledge that probably a good idea. And so just those considerations. A couple things that come into my mind, but I can't lie and say that, being in operations and facilities management, I don't have a bunch up here. And I would love to add more, and I'll do that.
I would put this up for consideration that it would probably be beneficial for us to reach out to a different consultant in terms of not from an architectural lens, but from a programmatic lens of what would make sense for our district. Let me just be very clear. So as we're going through this whole branding, right? And as we're addressing challenges that we have, We know EP, unfortunately, for whatever reason, has always been a challenge. We know right now our high school is a challenge. What sets us apart? That's a question that as we're looking at whatever we're doing programmatically, what is it that we have to offer that other surrounding districts do not? And it doesn't mean we have to figure that out in isolation. There's individuals that we can pull in to help do that work. To your point, I'm not jumping just to jump. I want to do something that I feel is innovative. There is an issue around literacy. We have over 50% of our kids that are not proficient at that grade level that should be. We've got to stop putting Band-Aids on at the upper grades, and we need to make sure that at the early grades, our kids are reading, period. And whatever that looks like. I'm curious, I'm interested in them being all in one location, because then the consistency is automatically built in from a programmatic approach, and the resources and the partnerships that we establish are very focused. So I hear what everyone is saying, and it's for us to take into consideration. I did not think we would unpack all this in the evening. We knew that but I needed to give a base, because we've got to get some momentum on what direct, because you hear the timelines. I mean, a spring start of whatever we're looking at doing, whatever our first project is, we gotta
Get on it.
we gotta get on it. Yeah. But I don't want to do that and sacrifice some of those other very valid points. Yeah, I mean, but like you said, Cedarburg makes sense. I don't think we don't need anyone to come in. We all know that should have been happened, right?
Right.
So that's maybe where we start. But still, that piece has to make sense with the other pieces that we're looking at. So just wanted that big piece of what sets us apart is huge for me. If we can't compete with our entry level salary, what else potentially is attracting folks to Cheltenham from a programmatic perspective, right? Where they see the vision and the direction of what it is that we're trying to do. So I'm gonna leave it at that. John, I don't know. We're at 8:29. So I'm not trying to cut anyone. I'm not trying to cut anyone.
Leah said she's here till 11.
Yeah, my bedtime's 11.
So my watch.
So do we?
I wanted.
Yeah, we didn't even.
There's one. Should we do?
We got this. No, let's do this.
Ooh.
All right, so we talked about these different costs, these different items, these puzzle pieces that need to be put together. Well, what size math do we have to put all these puzzle pieces together? So I thought it prudent in this conversation to look at our millage rate and our ability to tax and raise money to pay for these said items. To look at our borrowing capacity, if we even have the ability to pay for said items, and keeping those in mind. What available funds do we have for said projects, and what does that impact the budget? So in terms of tax rate, obviously there's not a lot of space, there's not a lot of momentum that can be had by trying to pay for all said projects through tax increases. When we look at our district's debt limit, our current borrowing capacity is at $146 million. That's about half of our borrowing capacity is already used. And what does that mean? Does that mean we should go the whole way to the top of our borrowing capacity? Absolutely not. This is just a benchmark and a threshold. When we look at what an acceptable level of debt is, what Moody's will do, or what a bond rating company will do, we'll look at Cheltenham and how Cheltenham compares to its neighbors, to other governmental entities alike. So here is a look at debt service percentage as a percent of our total expenditures in our general fund. When we compare Cheltenham to the rest of Montgomery County, you can see we're right at 8.45%. When we compare Cheltenham School District to the rest of the state, we're in the top quarter percentile, like a lot of our neighbors in this area, like a lot of school districts with a lot of school buildings that were constructed around 1955. They have a slightly higher than average debt service. So how high can this number realistically go before it becomes unreasonable, or before it's going to start impacting us on the bond rating side to where it's going to increase our interest costs, it's going to increase our borrowing costs, it's going to negatively impact us and our ability to raise funds in the future should we have any other projects we need to take care of. And so the answer is somewhere below this 14% threshold, somewhere below 14% of debt service. And that puts us at one of the highest levels of debt service in the entire state, should the district decide to make that investment. And that gap is roughly only a $60 million bond issue. It's not a tremendous amount of money. I thought it prudent to look at our current existing debt schedule. So on the bottom, we have all of our fiscal years going out to 2047. The blue lines here represent what our current existing debt schedule is. So all of our debt is essentially panned out to be an even $10 million as it currently exists through 2041, at which point it drops off to zero. This $10 million level debt service roughly represents $125, $130, $140 million roughly, depending on interest rate borrowing. So when you get to this point and you're talking about renovating a high school that was constructed in 1955, you're thinking we don't even have the debt service to do that until we get to the point where our debt service drops off into nothing. And that's still 15 years down the road. When you look at adding a $60 million bond issue, I hypothetically drew it up in orange, and that would increase our debt service level from 10 million to 14 million. If we talk about another debt issue to pay for HVAC, then now we're up in the $15 million range. So now we have one of the highest debt service ratios in the state, and we're looking at an additional $5 million in annual budget we have to come up with. So if we add it all together, what we have and what our max borrowing would be, we currently have $13 million in our general fund assigned for capital projects. We currently have $12 million in our cap reserve fund. I have a question mark here. What surplus are we looking at through the end of this year? Is it 5 million? Is it 7 million? And what is our available debt service? So adding all those pieces up together, we're right now sitting at a $90 million available resources, assuming we're willing to go and maximize our debt capacity. So if we make all those assumptions, then you can add two projects together and easily exceed this number. So we certainly have limitations in what we can do moving forward. And just to illustrate what the impact of our budget is, $60 million in new borrowing, that's $3.8 million in annual debt service. That's roughly 4.5% tax increase that would have to be phased in over multiple years, depending on what every 20 million. So just to give you an idea of what $20 million borrowing is, $60 million borrowing, 1.2 million, 1.25% tax percent increase versus a 4%, just to raise these type of funds to pay for whatever project. So we talked about it earlier, but on given direction, I think the other piece of this needs to be what direction we're looking at. What is the total square footage of educational space that we're going to need to achieve our goal? What is the staffing going to look like for that proposed plan? Comparing staffing to these two plans we seem to have worked ourselves down to. What does transportation look like? What does maintenance of these spaces look like? I think these are the next pieces that need to be added in. But the sobering piece of all of this is I wouldn't recommend maxing out our debt limit. I wouldn't recommend getting into a position where we don't have the ability to pivot and flex if we have a building catastrophe or a building repair or need. We ran into one last year with our fire alarm system. So certainly that, I put these up here as financial considerations and let's. Any questions on this information?
Looks like there is none. Can we go to the community? And see the questions we have out there. So Jennifer Ware, resident in Elkins Park and parent, seeking clarification. May you share the rationale for selecting Glenside as the site to renovate? Did you consider all of the costs to renovate and expand the other elementary schools? How will the social impacts be taken into account regarding the redistricting recommendation?
Yeah, I would say again, looking at the other three schools, there's just an inability to expand. So Glenside was only chosen because it really is the only one with land and not a lot of land. So it's not even easy to expand that building. So there certainly wasn't a bias to the other three. There's just absolutely no room there. And again, none of the options were really considering redistricting unless that is a choice that you wanted to do. Yeah, I mean, that Glenside was chosen, like I said, just because it has a little bit of space along the side.
And for clarification, you can't build up unless you've originally planned and designed a building to be more than one.
No, in fact, again, if you look at Glenside from the front, it's 2 stories and then steps down at the end. So those are the 2 we're talking about eliminating. So we're not building over those. We would be taking them down and then starting above that. So yeah, I mean, it is a Herculean task for sure to try to build up and over anything as far as trying to stack something. I've seen that done once where it's just a superstructure that went over it. So it didn't sit on top of it. Actually built columns on the side and basically made a 3rd floor over the second. That's you can do that. That's really expensive.
Mr. Schultz?
I just want to, just because the last line there about redistricting recommendation, I want to make sure we don't have any rumors running out of this meeting that anyone was recommending redistricting because it would be so disruptive. So I think that at least the way I heard it, there are many options. Some of those options, which are not even necessarily recommended, would force us to consider redistricting, and that would be weighed as a major negative against it. So I just wanted to clarify that nobody in this meeting has been saying this is a path we would take per se. I have a question for the actual for the most recent section around finances. So the 90 million, it sounds like essentially the recommendation here is that we have potential capacity for a $90 million worth of work to be done over the course of what period of time? Again.
So right now, if the bids are out the door and the price tag, and that we're to start now, I don't have a crystal ball to say, we'll see bids 2 years from now. Do we have additional surplus that we could be used to have a greater debt capacity because it will increase as our budget grows because it's based on the size of your budget. Just right now, just taking a snapshot in time. We started today. This is our limitation.
That's very helpful. And part of the reason that's helpful is if we did approach it as a phased approach, we could look at $50 million worth of work over the next 2 years, and then in 2 years reevaluate. And at that point, we might have additional capacity for either borrowing or, if we've identified efficiencies, surplus in budget. The other question I had was around that 90 is the maximum, but it also isn't even the ideal, correct? Like ideally it would not be up to.
I would not recommend maxing out to the 60. I mean, when
Right.
you look at your future capacity to buy and pay for whatever project is down the road, it becomes very limiting.
Okay.
And not that you couldn't say in 2038, say we really need to replace the high school. We're really running fumes here. How do we start that project? you could stack debt, you could ladder debt past, but then you're increasing the interest costs. 'Cause now you're-
Josh, are you gonna be here in 2030? No, I'm just.
I got a solid 25 years.
And then another question is around, I have a feeling I know the answer, but alternative sources of money. And that's, is there anything in the cards in the infrastructure bill that around efficiency, if we're talking about HVAC, or is there any potential for us to have a capital campaign to approach alumni and get people to, et cetera, et cetera? Have we explored that, and do we think
We
there's
have
any?
not explored.
Okay.
21st century community learning centers. Also, we were to make our early learning center into partially district office. There's potential grant money there from the
Interesting.
federal government that could support that.
The state passed 100 million in its last budget for school improvements. So great. So how do we get that? And they 2 months ago said, we'll get back to you. Today, the governor announced $300 million for school construction. So great. Is that Plan Con? How do we get there? It's like, we'll get back to you. So they passed 100 million, but no one knows how to get it. There's talk of 300. So there's hopefully some,
Okay.
Plan Con was a system of reimbursement in the past, but that stopped about 11 years ago now. So hopefully if some of that comes back, that's partial reimbursement, 10, 20% at best, but that's still, when we're talking millions of dollars, that's millions of dollars.
And I wanted to add, 100 million, it's a big number, it sounds great,
Across the state.
but you have to look at the perspective that there's 500 districts.
That's great.
So that's what, $500,000?
Well, we need it most, so.
Now, that's, for construction projects, and so not every district has a project, but when you spread it out over 100 school districts.
And we should be clear, the Plan Con has been in moratorium for decades.
Right.
Like, it hasn't been funded for a decade. There's a new project, a new plan that's grown up, that hasn't been funded. I mean, I don't look at that as reliable.
And to be clear,
This grant money is for asbestos abatement, lead remediation.
Understood.
It doesn't look like this is coming toward.
Understood. So I appreciate it. I wanted to ask the question. I also know that the answer to the question is almost impossible to give until we've identified a direction, unfortunately. So it's probably once we pick the right path within our means, if we can sweeten the deal through novel sources, that'd be great. Thank you.
This is a great segue into the budget.
Hey, there we go. Clock's gone. So if we're about to segue, I do have one last question though.
Of course you
It's
can.
short. What are the next steps? So I know, Dr. Scriven, you mentioned the public being able to provide some input. I know there was the idea of identifying two paths. How is that gonna look, and will we be having a follow-up presentation?
Well, we need to unpack, as a board first, what our recommendations are. Because it's the recommendations of you as a board that would then be pushed out to the greater Cheltenham community. I think we need to call a meeting outside of this forum just to really unpack what those next steps will look like. We will bring our recommendations of those next steps to the table, but yeah, we need to have a follow-up. So and then we'll consult with Mike and figure out if there's other resources we need to bring in as well in terms of moving this forward. But the goal is to have at least one project. Well, let me not say that. We are with the athletic facility. That is a project that we're looking at embarking on. But yeah, we need one that touches the academic side of the shop. And if we can have something ready by spring that we know is a non-negotiable, it makes sense. I think that would be a good way to go. But time's not our friend right now, so I'll try to get something set sooner than later.
In the meantime, what I would ask is if you all would send any questions that you even think about after tonight to Dan and myself. And what we'll do, since they'll be coming in from different people, we can't deliberate. We'll consolidate those questions and get them over to Dr. Scriven and Josh. So if you all can do that like in the next week, that would be really helpful too.
Next couple of days.
Well, next couple of days, okay, I'll say next couple, well, by the end,
Yeah, by the
end of the
end of
By the end of the
the
week.
end of the week,
Yeah,
and
I'm
then
serious, like we gotta, it's it's on Team KCBA. We always thank you guys. Earlier, I know it's a lot to
Very
be
thorough.
here,
Thank you.
on a Tuesday.
The 5-second version of the stadium,
Oh.
This was just about.
they're still going through land development. The goal is to bid the stadium project at the end of this year with the hopes of
Josh, can you just
constructing
do Q&A?
this time next year, so it's done in the summer of, what year is this, 25. The scope there includes a turf field, the track, some new stands and a new ticket booth and entry area that's includes security. So that is ongoing and is in the design and approval stage.
If you can, or Josh, I know you may have it. Why don't we just put the door board update around this so they have something more concrete with respect to where we are in the process.
So
Kind of what the
bathrooms would
timeline
be
is.
over there. Right.
So when you come up from the parking lot, you have that kind of little building that sits there now.
Yep.
In doing, so this would be the path from the parking lot, the high school, let's say to the right. When you're rebuilding the building and rebuilding stands, by code, you need to provide the proper amount of restroom facilities. And there tends to be a lot for stadiums and things like that. We just did that at Boyertown and some other schools as well. This isn't, anything great. It's block and toilets, and in the winter you can turn the water off and the heater down to 40 degrees just so nothing freezes. But it's a ticket area, concession area. We talked about some the ability for some security scanning and things like that. Those when you go to Phillies and Eagles games now, they have the evolved things. So it's not a metal detector anymore. It's actually reading dense metals. But it allows you don't get zapped as much. You don't have to put your keys away. It's somebody with an iPad that's just kind of watching as they go through. So that technology is becoming a little bit more available and a little bit more affordable. So you'd have a bit of a security spot like this. You buy your ticket, you head on in, and then those buildings to the left is storage, as well as women's and men's, and a family unisex toilet as well there. And then again behind that, turf, track, and bleachers.
Mr. Richard Williams?
Just a quick question, because I know we got here and we also talked about the finance aspect of all this. So just curious about the impact of this project on the projections that we discussed on the slides prior. Maybe the answer isn't available right now, but I think just for the overall aspect of, facilities capital planning and what we're spending money on, I think it would just be important to understand what that impact is, because if we're talking about a $90 million top end that we don't want to spend money on, but I would expect that this project is going to impact that total number as well. So it's overall understanding.
The rough budget is $10 million.
Okay.
We have a full fleshed out. We can share that.
We're still, need to get things defined stormwater wise and with the bleachers and that, so we can sort of dial in a budget. Right now, that's the placeholder. We're hoping it's a little less than that, if we get down to 8, that'd be great. But it's enough money that it certainly impacts your other decisions here. There's less money in the queue.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other questions?
Mike, Jim, right? Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mike.
Thank you.
That wasn't in here.
No, but it's not.
See you Friday.
I don't think that was.
Mr. Swiger, can we push out the KCBA presentation?
Good night.
So where we at?
Night, Mr. Holmes.
Sorry.
You are missed. Oh, sorry.
Round 3.
All right, I'm gonna try and boil these slides down to one sentence.
This is numbers.
They're big enough. Interim financial statements, preliminary budget, we did the feasibility study, so 1 out of 3 is done. Cash, still in a strong financial position. One thing of note to look at is our change in our fund balance year over year. Last year, we were still looking at revenues of 111 million, expenditures of 59.7 million, and a change in fund balance of 51.2. This year, we're looking at 110 million in revenue, 61.5 million of expenditures, and a change in fund balance of 49 million. So a trend downward. How alarming is that trend? We're behind on federal revenues, so this will not be real by the end of the year. We should be caught up. That covers revenues. On the expenditure side, what trend you will see going forward is you see in regular and special ed programs, we have additional salary expenses, we have professional salary contractual increases, we have support staff contractual salary increases and benefits associated with that. That's driving these two figures. And on the transportation side, this year in particular, of the 5-year contract we have with Cheltenham Transportation, this one in particular had a 10% increase. The future increases are not nearly as large, and that is reflecting in a $400,000 increase year over year in transportation costs. So adding this slight reduction in these increases has resulted in a year over year operating decrease of $2 million. So not something to be terribly alarmed of. Obviously, we anticipated increased expenditures at the beginning of the year. And looking at local revenues, again, interest is really driving our local revenues. Year over year, we already have collected more than $1 million from the prior year. Anyone who saw the news this week saw that the Fed has said they're going to hold interest rates, the Fed Reserve rate again, potentially another 6 months. So that certainly impacted our budget forecast for interest and what we can depend on going forward for next year. And this number is going to remain high. So what does that mean for capital planning as well? Are we in a hurry to borrow at high interest rates, and are we in a hurry to spend down money that's earning interest? And that is why the capital plan isn't necessarily fast-tracked. On the real estate tax side, we're only looking at a $600,000 increase over the prior year. In the prior year, we had some real estate tax settlements that fed into this number, and then we anticipated a close to $1 million increase year over year based on our tax increase. But we didn't quite realize that because we did have some residual real estate tax settlements that fell into this year. We are at the end of January, so we have completed our tax collection cycle. So these numbers are pretty close to where they're going to end up year over year. All right, the preliminary budget. So I took last year's final budget and I stacked it against this year's preliminary budget, just so we get an idea of where revenues and expenditures were headed. The biggest change to see year over year is our federal sources of income. September 30th, 2024 marks the end of ESSER funding and ESSER spending. We only budgeted it through June 30th, 2024. with the anticipation of the vast majority of it will be spent by that time. So we did not include any in the 24-25 preliminary budget. Next year, all of our federal money is coming from title money and medical access money. So you have a decrease on your revenue side of roughly $2 million. You'll also see sprinkled throughout the expenditure side decreases in ESSER-related expenditures. So if you're wondering why did central services decrease by $2 million, well, we're not buying as much technology. We're not buying as much information, curriculum services. This was a lot of planned ESSER spending. You'll see that in a couple other categories in the budget. On the rest of the revenue side, local sources, obviously, there's no tax increase planned in the preliminary budget. We're kind of seeing where our revenues and our expenditures lie without a tax increase for the next year. You can see that our local source revenue is relatively flat. That is driven by an increase in our projected interest income. On the state side, this is also projected flat. And for those of you who saw the governor's budget address, it was quite robust in terms of increases to the basic ed subsidy in response to the equitable funding lawsuit in Pennsylvania for school districts. The current proposal for Cheltenham School District in the budget today was a $2.4 million increase in the basic ed subsidy, which would more than fund the deficit in our budget. Now, that is not included in this number. No increases in state subsidies are included in this number. The number that was presented today obviously is a very preliminary number. Hopefully, when we get to June, we have a better idea of where that's going to end up. Just for reference, the past 2 years, we were looking at less than $800,000 an increase to our basic ed subsidy. So this 2.4 million would be absolutely historic and 3 times as much as what we had received. So I wouldn't anticipate that, but that is what's out. So as customary for the preliminary budget, any deficit is funded with fund balance spending. On the expenditure side, we'll stick with the revenue side. So we talked about the ESSER funding. This just summarized what I described verbally. We talked about the ESSER funding increases in Title I and other federal monies. The $972,000 increase in state subsidies, as I described, is the current budget is just level funding of the prior budget for state subsidies. Last year's budget did not include the full increase in state subsidies, so this is a bit of a catch-up. The reason being the $800,000 last year was historic, so we didn't budget the full 800. We didn't budget the full special ed subsidy. We didn't budget the full pension subsidy until those numbers were finally released. On the local source side, obviously we're budgeting our tax increase. We're budgeting an additional $750,000 to interest income and $420,000 of all other local source revenue, which is primarily earned income tax. We're not budgeting any increases in real estate transfer tax because of our current collection history is kind of at a not historic, but within the last 5 years low. And we're not budgeting any increases to delinquent taxes. I know I breezed through that kind of quickly. Any questions on the revenue budget?
One thing, if you can go back just a couple, yeah, right there. I did want to point out that we were very intentional around how we use our ESSER funds, and we did not use them for positions. You had a lot of districts that did do that, and now they're in a tough situation. So I understand that there's some variance from last year to this year, but that is one piece that we were not having to worry about. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Mr. Schultz?
Two questions. First was on the next slide, the 450 for real estate taxes. Could you, you said that this does not include a tax increase, right? So what is that? What's that 450? Because I think I just misunderstood it.
So that represents the development, the interim taxes that occurred, and the real estate tax assessments that occurred over the past year to add to the.
So that's just a natural increase to our real estate taxes based on those assessments.
It's mostly the development costs from Sheldon Elementary.
Understood. My other question was, and I don't know if this touches on expenses or not, but the flip side of that question is, are there programs that aren't salaries, but were and would be beneficial that were paid for by us or that we should be considering to continue?
So, we're working through that now. Matter of fact, I did get some updates from Josh in terms of, there was a question because of Vanessa was ending September 30th. How would that impact us? Because districts are doing things differently. Some are running things through that 24, 25. We want to make sure, is that something that we can actually do or not? So we're unpacking that right now. And we'll be able to give you guys updates in our future finance.
There's a lot of technology upgrades, curriculum, material, learning loss upgrades in our curriculum department. There's a lot of literacy training done. That was a big expense. So those are, that goes away, but information resides within our teachers. So trying to focus on things that benefit district long-term and address COVID learning loss.
Thank you.
Discussed already, no tax increases, including the preliminary budget. No increases in the state subsidies, and yes, until we have a better idea of where those negotiations are headed. ESSER money expired. Current budget shortfall roughly equal to 1% increase in real estate tax rate. That included our max Act 1 index tax rate, which would be 5.3%. Not that we're increasing taxes 5.3%, but that would be the max we would be allowed to per state regulation. So, 1% would be well below that number. All right, highlighting where our revenue comes from, 71% is locally driven through real estate taxes, plus another 6.5% on top of that. So Shelton is very much reliant on its taxpayers and not as much reliant on state and federal sources, federal income being less than 1%. On the expenditure side, driving expenditures this year include our employment costs, our salary and wage increases, and our benefit and health insurance costs. It was nice to find out the Pacers again did not increase their contribution rate. It was reduced last year to 34% and was reduced again this year to 33.9%. So we get a whopping 0.1% savings. But on the flip side, our health insurance costs, and again, this is based on our first look, are showing a 10.6% increase, which is semi-historically bad. But that was our first look. It was conservative. It did not reflect some of the changes in our recent collective bargaining agreements. So I think we're going to see a reduced number from that going forward. But that's the largest piece of this $1.3 million increase. It's important to note that unsettled employment contracts are not included in this number. So they are uncertain at this point in time. If there's more clarity by the time we pass the budget, they will be included in this figure. One item here that's kind of interesting is our substitute budget. We had some catching up to do because over the past couple of years, our sub-fill rate was increasing dramatically and our budget was not reflecting that. Also, our substitute rates had to be increased to be competitive as districts continue to fight over subs. We did offset that by partially offset that by renegotiating our contract and our sub-services markup rate. We dropped that down 5%. So that partially offset the cost of that. And on the transportation side, we do have another scheduled increase for next year that's roughly $300,000. Any questions on the expenditure side? This chart is important to look at because with salaries and benefits make up 68%, almost 70% of everything the district does. So our health insurance is next in line after P-Search, which is next in line after salary expenses. Those are our three biggest expenditures and make up almost the entire of this. think I covered all of this. Any other questions on the expenditure side?
I know this does not include potential for attritional savings, which for new board members in the past, there have been positions that are deemed, when somebody's retiring or resigning, basically not filled, and that yields sort of natural savings without letting it go. Do we have I'm not looking for an answer right now, but I'm curious if we have a sense of what the range of potential for attritional savings there might be this year.
So that is a very complex question. You also have to factor in column movement on salary schedules, probably will more than offset attrition. I think the best way to look at it is when we get closer to June, we take our actual salary, our teacher salaries, and just do what I did now, plug the actual amounts into the budget.
So what I'm hearing is, in the past, that might have been seen as a potential major opportunity. This year, it's not necessarily going to be one.
No, and I'm I just cut to the chase, and Josh is much more eloquent than what I am. And even if it is, they're going to have to be reallocated. And there's, you always ask the question, so what are some of the needs, right? There are needs that we are going to have to address to just really offset some of what should be happening that currently is not happening. You guys have noticed, our data specialists only started in October, but look at some of the things that have happened from them starting in October to now. Last Friday, you guys all got an email with the data portal opening up for parents and for students. Something that when I onboarded was a request. We have to take that another level to really have a school-based data portal also, where you can just go in and see the snapshot. That's one thing that everything is continuous improvement. We have to get to the point where we're actually benchmarking ourselves against other like districts. We're not there yet. So I don't want to digress from Josh's presentation, and it's getting late, but I'm just being very realistic around attrition. And you heard Adrian mention it earlier today. So far, we've only heard of 2 potential retirements today. So as they continue to come through, we will continue to keep you updated and what that ultimately, will look like.
Actually, I thought you were talking about something else. I thought you were talking about retirees at the top of the scale retiring and replacing them with younger attritional savings. So that
I'm locked in.
Right.
to-
the answer is the same.
Right.
I think that savings is eliminated with column movement.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, the final slide. This is the state budget update that was pushed out today by the governor. This number is in thousands, so this is a $1 billion increase at 13.62% when going through the state's basic education formula. Roughly works out to 2.4 billion for the basic educational subsidy. You can see there's other large increases in here. Obviously, we hope they come to fruition. I did not see middle school project. Control Any question? Anyone who watched the state budget presentation today? Any questions on the content? If not,
It's not a middle school project line item. However, Shellingham, as though the proposal would receive like one of the highest percentage increases from year to year across the entire state. I think it ranks like somewhere around 6 or 7, which caught me really by surprise. And I was like, whoa. Thanks to Senator Haywood, Senator Nelson, State Representative Nelson, all of our advocates, but that caught me, it's like somewhere around 36%, and it's top 10 in the state.
It probably has to do with that pie
It's
chart
the
that you
advocacy,
just
it's
showed.
the adequacy
Yeah,
addition.
yeah.
But even then, why would we, I mean, I'll pause, but Cheltenham was pretty much on par with what we should be getting. And so the fact that we had one of the highest adequacy gaps just caught me as something to.
Well, that also has to do with the fact that we're funding 70% of.
Oh, the local
Local revenue, that's
capacity,
what it
that's
is.
what it is,
Yeah.
that's what it is. Yeah, that's what it is.
Just a quick question for you on the pre-K counts. Like, where does that money go to already existing pre-K programs?
Correct.
Okay.
So you have to develop a pre-K curriculum and you apply for the state through the pre-K grant counts a grant, and they allocate you so many seats based on your curriculum program and your ability to run the program. And typically the amount they pay for those seats funds the program. A lot of districts try and partner with outside daycare agencies to run the pre-K grants program. It's kind of a mutually beneficial type thing. We partner with the MCIU and they run the program through one of our buildings.
Yeah, and just from being on the MCIU board, the one thing about pre-K counts is the staff actually get paid quite a bit less. And that's been an issue for the MCIU board. It's sort of how we can continue to sort of raise the hourly rates of the paras and the other support staff and the teaching staff for those.
Considerably less than teachers in this
And
same
then
district.
other IU teachers.
Um,
Yeah, like teachers who are in IU run special education classes. For example.
Can I get a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved, Zach Rios.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.